All right, welcome. Today we are diving deep into Chapter 7 of the CIMA E3 syllabus, Resources and Capabilities. Now, I want you to think of this session as your secret weapon for the exam. We're going to break down all the key models you need, but we'll do it in a way that's simple, memorable, and super easy to apply when the pressure's on. So, let's get right into it. In this explainer, you're going to learn exactly how to evaluate strategic options using resources and capabilities so you can pass your CIMA E3 exam. And look, this isn't just about memorizing theory, right? This is about giving you the practical tools and frameworks that the CIMA examiner is actively looking for. By the time we're done here, you'll be able to walk into that exam, look at any case study, and confidently make a strategic recommendation that's backed up by solid logic. So, what's on the menu today? Well, we've got our strategist toolkit all laid out. First, we'll start by taking stock of your core assets. Then we'll look at how you use those assets to build a real value machine. After that, we'll learn how to navigate those tricky market life cycles and benchmark your performance against the best. And then, the grand finale. We'll bring it all together with the SAF evaluation framework to make the final choice. And of course, we'll wrap up by talking about how to use all of this to absolutely nail your E3 exam. First things first, before any company can even dream about where it wants to go, it has to take a long, hard, brutally honest look at what it already has in the toolbox. I mean, this is the absolute bedrock of any good strategy. It's all about understanding what resources and capabilities you actually have to play with. This whole process of internal analysis, we call it a resource audit. So, what exactly is a resource audit? Well, it's pretty simple, really. It's just a review of the company's assets. And we split these into two big categories. You've got your tangible resources. That's the stuff you can physically kick or count. Think machinery, buildings, cold hard cash. Then you have the intangible resources. Now, you can't touch these, but wow, are they powerful. We're talking about your brand reputation, your patents, the knowledge locked away in your people's heads. Just think about Apple. Their brand is one of the most valuable intangible assets on the planet, while the physical factories owned by their suppliers are tangible. A winning strategy knows how to leverage both. Now, this next one, the 9Ms model, this is an absolute gift for the exam. Seriously, think of it as your ultimate checklist for a deep dive resource audit. It covers the obvious stuff, right? Men, your people, money, machinery. But the real strategic gold is often buried in the less obvious Ms. I'm talking about methods, those unique processes that nobody else has, and makeup, which covers crucial intangibles like your company culture and patents. These are often the secret sauce, the source of a competitive advantage that's almost impossible for others to copy. In a case study, use this model to find not just the obvious strengths, but the hidden capability gaps that could sink a strategy. Right, so we've taken stock. We know what's in the cupboard. But now for the big question. How do we actually use this stuff to make something customers are willing to pay for? This is all about building the engine, figuring out how we configure all our activities to create and deliver real value. So every single business, at its core, has a value proposition. It's that simple promise you make to your customers about what you're offering. That value is built on specific value drivers, things like amazing quality, a cool brand, or customer service that just blows people away. Your business model is the machine that makes it all happen. It defines everything. How do you get paid? Are you a subscription service like Netflix or a platform model like Uber? What's your cost structure? Who are your key partners? It's the whole shebang, the complete system for creating, delivering, and crucially, capturing value. Okay, listen up, because this one is huge for your E3 exam. This is Porter's value chain. And please, don't just memorize the labels, you have to understand how it works. Think of the primary activities at the bottom as the main assembly line of the business, from getting stuff in the door to shipping it out and supporting the customer. The support activities up top, like HR and technology, are the essential services that keep that assembly line running smoothly. And here's the key takeaway for your exam. Your competitive advantage comes from doing these activities better or cheaper than your rivals. You use this model in a case study to pinpoint exactly where a company is winning and where it can improve its final margin. Now, that value chain doesn't just exist in a bubble, right? It's connected to a whole network of suppliers and customers. Managing all those connections? That's supply chain management. We talk about upstream activities. That's everything coming from your suppliers. And downstream activities, which is everything involved in getting the product to your customers. A massive strategic choice here is the trade-off between being efficient and being responsive. An efficient supply chain, like for basic groceries, is all about one thing, the lowest possible cost. But a responsive supply chain, like Zara uses for fast fashion, is built for pure speed, so it can react to trends in a heartbeat, even if it's not the cheapest way. And then you have a company like Amazon, which is a masterclass in trying to do both, using incredible technology to be super responsive while being obsessed with driving down costs. Let's move to our next set of tools. You see, a brilliant strategy for a brand new product in an emerging market would be an absolute car crash for a mature product and a declining one. It's all about context. So great strategists need tools to figure out exactly where their products and their entire industry are in their life cycle, because that context, it dictates everything. All right, let's talk about the classic product lifecycle, or PLC. You've probably seen this curve before, right? Pretty much every product goes through these 4 phases. In the introduction stage, you're just trying to get noticed. Then in the growth stage, it's a land grab. Your goal is to get as much market share as possible while demand is exploding. Then comes maturity. The market's full, competition is everywhere, and you're just trying to defend your turf and make good profits. And finally, decline, where you have to make a tough call. Do you harvest the product for whatever cash is left, or just get rid of it? Think about the television, from a new black and white box to the growth of color to the maturity of it being in every home, and now the decline of old school sets as smart TVs take over. Your strategy has to change with each stage. Now, this is super important. Don't get this mixed up with the product lifecycle. They're related, but they're different. While the PLC looks at one product, this model looks at the entire industry. It kicks off with emergence, where there's tons of experimentation and uncertainty. Then comes growth, but after that, a really crucial stage, the shakeout. This is where things get brutal. Competition heats up and weaker companies get forced out. That leads to a stable maturity phase with just a few big players left, and then eventual decline. Think about the electric vehicle industry right now. It's left emergence and is in this crazy growth phase that is definitely heading for a massive shakeout. The intensity of competition just changes completely from one stage to the next. So, what do you do when you're a company that's juggling a bunch of different products, all at different lifecycle stages? How on earth do you decide where to put your money? Well, you pull out the BCG Matrix. This thing is a lifesaver for making those tough resource decisions. It plots your products based on how fast the market is growing and your relative market share. Your stars are your future. You've got to invest heavily in them. Your cash cows are your reliable moneymakers. They are in slow markets, but you dominate, so you just milk them for cash. Question marks are the big gambles. They could become stars if you invest, but they could also flop. And dogs, well, they're in slow markets where you have low share. The advice is usually to sell them off. It's a really powerful way to think about your portfolio. Okay, so far we spent a lot of time looking inward and at the market. But that's not enough. You see, you could be thinking you're doing an amazing job, but if your competitors are improving even faster, you're actually falling behind. To get a real objective view of how you're doing, you have to look outside and compare yourself to the best. And that is called benchmarking. Benchmarking is basically a structured way of comparing your performance against a standard. And you can do this in a few ways. You can do internal benchmarking, comparing different teams inside your own company. You can do competitive benchmarking, which is the obvious one, sizing yourself up against your direct rivals. Or, and this is a really clever one, you can do functional benchmarking, where you look at a world-class leader in a specific activity, even if they're in a totally different industry, like a small online shop benchmarking its delivery process against Amazon. The goal is always the same: find the performance gaps and then figure out how to close them. But, and this is a big but, be careful. Benchmarking tells you what to improve, but it doesn't always tell you how. It's a starting point, not the finish line. Okay, deep breath. This is it. This is the payoff. We've built our entire toolkit. We've audited our resources, mapped our value chain, analyzed the life cycles, and benchmarked our performance. Now we are going to put it all together. We're about to learn the ultimate CIMA framework, the one that's going to help you make a defensible strategic recommendation and score you some serious marks in the exam. So, any strategic option you come up with has to pass 3 big tests. Think of them as 3 gates it has to get through. The first is suitability. Does this option actually fix the key problems or grab the key opportunities you found in your analysis? This is where you bring in your SWOT, PESTEL, and value chain to argue why it's a good fit. Second is acceptability. Does this option meet what our stakeholders, especially our shareholders, expect? We're talking about risk and return here. And finally, the ultimate reality check, feasibility. Can we actually pull this off? This is where your resource audit and your 9Ms analysis are absolutely mission critical. Do we really have the money, the people, and the systems to make this happen?
Okay, get your phones ready because this is a classic screenshot moment. You'll thank me for this later. When you're in the exam and you're writing your answer, you need to structure your evaluation around these exact questions. For suitability, you ask, does this option play to our strengths? Does it fit where we are in the market? For acceptability, you put on your investor hat. What's the payback? What's the risk? And for feasibility, you become the practical manager. Do we have the cash, the skills, the technology? A top-scoring answer doesn't just focus on one. It gives a balanced, justified argument across all three, using evidence from the case to back up every single point.
All right, now for a proper pro tip. This is the kind of insight that really makes a difference. In theory, all three criteria, suitability, acceptability, and feasibility, are equal. But in practice, and especially in exam scenarios, there's a definite pecking order. You might come up with several options that all look suitable. On paper, they all seem to solve the problem, but they often get filtered out by the other two tests. An option might be perfectly suitable, but if it's way too risky or the financial return just isn't there, it fails the acceptability test. Another idea might be suitable and acceptable, but if you simply don't have the money or the people to do it, it fails the feasibility test. So think of suitability as the first gate, but acceptability and feasibility are the final, hard-nosed hurdles that most ideas crash into.
So there you have it. We've gone from the ground up, from auditing our most basic assets all the way to using a powerful framework to make the final critical choice. We've assembled a complete strategist's toolkit. Now, let's just crystallize what this all means for you and your path to passing this exam.
You now understand how to evaluate strategic options using resources and capabilities, exactly what CIMA E3 expects. You've got the models, like the 9 M's and the value chain, to properly analyze a company's internal position. You have the life cycle and portfolio tools to understand the bigger market context. And most importantly, you have the SAF framework to tie it all together into a coherent, powerful, and well-justified strategic recommendation. Honestly, this is the core skill for E3. Practice applying this toolkit, get comfortable with it, and you will be ready and confident on exam day. Best of luck with your studies.